This is one of the debates that has been going around lately. The debate around are layer twos extensions of Ethereum. Ethereum skeptics will say that layer twos are not, and they are not Ethereum. They are new chains. They have separate state. They have separate transaction ordering rules. They have separate execution fees that are captured by the layer twos, not shared with the layer ones. Ethereum proponents will say that all layer twos will use Ethereum for security, are natural extensions of Ethereum. How do you think about this debate? I personally don't think it's such a binary. I think there's more of a continuum here. But where's your position on this debate?
Yeah, I would agree that it's more of a continuum, but I would say on that continuum, it's more in the direction of these are separate chains right now.
Mm.
So if they want to continue their decentralized roadmap, they want to make sure that they're frequently, pushing stuff to L1. They are going to have fraud proofs. They're going to have forced transactions. Then they start to move over towards being part of Ethereum. If they start to have, composability features that allow them to compose more easily, that's moving further in that direction. But I think the issue that I would see is the ones that look like they're winning have no incentive to do that. And so they're like claiming loudly that they're part of Ethereum and they don't have fraud proofs enabled, and they don't seem to be moving towards decentralized sequencing at all. And they're trying to build interoperability within their own ecosystem with the superchain. So it's like, are you trying to be Ethereum, or are you just trying to leech Ethereum users and mindshare and build your own thing and launch your own token and pay for gas in your own token?
Maybe you can extrapolate your fears outwards, like 1, 3, 10 years. Coinbase keeps investing in Base. Optimism superchain becomes very composed with itself. What are the if we don't change direction here? What are your fears that will like fester over time?
Yeah, I'll give the doomer worst case scenario, and I'm not. I mean, there's a lot of good people working on those things, so I don't want to say that they're evil, but like the incentives are there. There's a corporate governance structure at Coinbase, which is not the same as Jesse. Like these are two different things. And there's going to be, I work at a big company, Consensus. We have a corporate governance structure. The head of Linea and the head of the corporate governance structure are not the same person. But we have certain other interests that we have in the ecosystem that allow us to prioritize moving towards decentralized sequencing. When I look at Coinbase, I don't think that those interests are the same, because Coinbase is like, for us, we have MetaMask. We want people using Ethereum. We want users in the ecosystem. We want transactions flowing, and we want decentralization. And our CEO is one of the co-founders of Ethereum. So we are deeply aligned with Ethereum. Coinbase, they get a lot of revenue from people trading Ethereum on their centralized exchange, but they aren't linked in the same way. And so my fear would be, okay, we push a bunch of users to an L2 like Base. Their financial incentives are such that they don't want to decentralize the sequencer. And then they continue to build user base, build market power, increase their revenue to the point where all of the activity is happening on a centralized sequencer. And that's not crypto to me. That's not Ethereum to me. Like it's not decentralized at all. It's just a centralized server sequencing transactions on the box. Maybe they have fraud proofs, maybe they don't. Right now they don't. So that would be my biggest fear, is basically market power, network effects happen, and these things become too big to move. Right now, we still have time to change things. In the future, in 5 years, maybe all the activity's there, and it's impossible to claw back those users into a truly decentralized financial system.
And maybe you could give the inverse. What's a more happy path look like to you? And what changes might we need to get there?
Yeah, I think the happy path is, well, first of all, we're going to need some changes. So it's good that you flagged that. But the happy path is, okay, we're all aligned here. We're all building towards the same thing, which is like decentralized finance, decentralized ecosystem, censorship resistance, credible neutrality, Ethereum as money. If those are the things that we're all building towards, maybe we can quickly do the things that we need to do, like getting fraud proofs and forced inclusion. And then we can build some stuff for ZK rollups, which I would argue have kind of been left behind in the dust right now because we haven't been prioritizing them. And maybe we can get to a point where we do have decentralized sequencing on these optimistic and ZK rollups. I think that's like kind of the golden vision, the best case scenario for the L2 roadmap is like, hey, these guys say what they have been saying they're going to do for 5 years. They finally do it tomorrow. And then we actually do end up with a decentralized ecosystem. But like, I mean, how long have these guys been saying that they're going to be decentralizing their sequencer and they haven't done it? It's like, how many times can they move the ball on us before we kind of realize that we're getting rugged here?
Max, are you trying to start a civil war here within Ethereum?
I'm not. I'm just like, if you're saying that you're Ethereum aligned and you're saying that you've been working on a decentralized sequencer, like, do it. Don't like continue to pass the ball and say it's going to be next month over and over and over again forever. Like, do it. Don't. And then we see, I mean, my view of this is if you look at Arbitrum, for example, they're doing something which is time boost, which is probably incompatible with decentralized sequencing. So when they're moving towards a system that looks to me to be incompatible with decentralized sequencing, and then talking out of the other side of their mouth that they're going to be moving towards like a decentralized sequencer, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so like if you're watching closely, the behavior that they are doing right now is not okay. So I'm not trying to start a civil war. I'm just trying to put pressure on people who say that they're aligned to actually follow through and put the actions where their mouth has been for the last 5 years.
Max, pressure is good, I think, and there are forms of social pressure that I think Ethereum is like put in place, and the community has put in place. And I want to talk about maybe a softer landing than the one that you illustrate, which is like basically that there's coordination failure across all of these layer twos, and kind of there's a disincentive to basically like cooperate and leave Ethereum as kind of the federal government, and so they kind of like make their own decisions in their best interest. And I think we should be eyes wide open to that as a possibility. However, the soft landing, I think the typical Ethereum roadmap, layer 2 roadmap bull would say, okay, like Max, look at layer 2 beat, right? All of these layer 2s, they start at stage 0. That's how it goes. There's like training wheels, right? And then you progress, and you add kind of like fraud proofs is like another step. And then you decentralize the sequencer, right? And then you collect all 5 of the pi slots on layer 2 beat, and you're kind of like over time fully decentralized. And indeed, we are seeing some progress, right? We saw some progress with Arbitrum, which is now kind of like stage 1. There's still another ways to go. We're seeing some progress with Optimism as well, which of course is the same code base for Base. I'm not sure if we've seen similar progress on decentralizing the sequencer, but basically the overall message here is, Max, just give it some time. Like, you got to wait. These technologies have to bake. We can't make things fully decentralized before we know it's like safe for users. And like the bear case that you're painting out just is like not going to come to pass. What do you say to this?
I think the problem is, what if certain ecosystems, certain rollups that don't actually want to decentralize? Like, the problem is, do these organizations, which are profitable, publicly traded companies in some cases, want to decentralize their sequencer? In their own best interest, it's actually better to keep the sequencer to themselves. And so if we let them do that, they're going to do it because that's their financial incentive. Like, that would be my argument, is like, look at the money, look at the incentives. The incentives are not towards decentralizing the sequencer. And so the more power and more users and more reliance that we have as an ecosystem on these agents, the less we're able to put pressure on them to decentralize. I think I'm not the only one who's a little bit unhappy with the speed of decentralization. I think Vitalik has said as much on Twitter as well, that the decentralization, the progression on the roadmap is, okay, we get to level 1, and then we sit there, and we sit there, and we sit there. And what really matters to me as a MEV researcher is whether we get to decentralized sequencer or not. I think the world looks pretty grim if most transactions are happening on Coinbase, on a centralized server on AWS East 1, and you can't participate in that if you're Edward Snowden, for example, because like you're sanctioned by the US government. I think that's not a great world. That's not a great end game for crypto, for me at least. Not why I joined the space.
Okay, can we just illustrate, get really concrete in terms of like what you would like to see from layer twos that would sort of disprove the idea that they're kind of like discoordinated and in it for their own like purposes only, and they're not willing to decentralize? So if the layer twos today, maybe the optimistic rollups, let's say, all get to kind of like stage two on layer two beat, and they've got fraud proofs, and they're all kind of like permissionless, and that works, and you can force include transactions, bypassing their sequencer, so you preserve censorship resistance. And also, they incorporate some sort of permissionless, decentralized sequencer among their centralized sequencer. Like, you know, part of the sequencing is done by decentralized sequencers. Would that be in the direction of they are doing the thing that is best for decentralization and Ethereum, and like you would applaud that? And you would, you know, somewhat call off the dogs, call off the alarm that you're raising right now?
I think, first of all, I don't think that forced inclusion on the L1 is sufficient censorship resistance for an L2 to have. I think the sequencer itself needs to have some amount of censorship resistance and credible neutrality, because if these apps are going to be there, like if global markets are going to be on chain, global markets on AWS East 1 box that can be censored at will by the US government doesn't sound to me like crypto. We might as well just have global markets on the CME or on the New York Stock Exchange or on, you know, wherever else you might have global markets in London or whatever. Like, the goal is to have global markets operating on chain, and being able to force an inclusion 6 hours later on the L1 is not going to help you trade if you're sanctioned by the US government, or if you're sanctioned by by Coinbase, because Coinbase doesn't like you. That would be my argument. So I think they actually need to get to censorship resistant, credibly neutral sequencing on the L2.
And what does that look like? Are there like solutions in place, or is this just like is this an engineering task, or is this still a researchy thing that we haven't figured out? I'm trying to get to the bottom of, is this a matter of like we don't have the tech, or is this a matter of we don't have the will and the coordination to do this?
I mean, you just run, you have to have consensus with permissionless consensus that is able to make the L2 blocks, basically. So we have that to some extent on the L1. There's one key aspect which I think is missing, which we talked about last time I was on, about censorship resistance, which requires multiple concurrent proposers, which I won't get into too much because there's a whole episode on it. But I think like we know how to do it most of the way, because it's just exactly what Ethereum L1 does for block building, which I guess you could argue is not exactly super decentralized these days. But I think the end game is you need to get to a block building engine, which is permissionless, which has multiple entities contributing to a single time step on the L2. And I think that's also where we need to go with the L1 as well. But if you want to be part of Ethereum, you cannot say that you're part of Ethereum and then have a centralized sequencer sequencing all the transactions on AWS East 1 and charging users a bunch of money to use the service, even though that's not the cost of the L1.
So Max, if there was the will, I just want to be clear on this because you're deeper into the kind of the tech than I am, and you know someone can independently validate what you're about to say. But like, if there was a will, do you think that all layer twos could get to kind of the decentralized sequencer that you're sort of talking about in, say, 6 months, if there was the will?
Yeah, you need like consensus on the blocks. Like we know how to do it. It's how blockchains work. Like you can have blocks being built by permissionless entities today. That's how Ethereum works today, is that we have a bunch of validators who have the right to propose a block. That's possible today because the technology is there for all blockchains, basically. They don't want to do it.
Are you kind of implying that you're looking for more of a fractal of layer two to spin off of the layer one? We have the structure of the layer one. We can make that be a layer two. You can stake your OP tokens, you can stake your ARB tokens, and then you also have a permissionless validator set, or at least a distributed one. That's kind of the original map of what I kind of thought the layer 2 landscape would eventually look like on Ethereum. Like we would have the tokens, and you as a user could stake the tokens. And if there's permissionless validation of these layer 2s, you could participate in the validation of your preferred network. That's kind of how I imagined the layer 2 landscape looking in 2019. That's not what has emerged. Is what I'm articulating kind of what you're also asking for?
Yeah, I mean, you just build a blockchain which can post to the L1 to get additional security. That blockchain is the one responsible for producing optimism blocks, for example. I don't think anybody thought that the end game for Ethereum was Ethereum becomes a cheap, undifferentiated DA chain, and a bunch of powerful companies build rollups on top of it and harvest as much power as much rent as they can from the monopoly that they have. That's not exactly what I think anybody wanted. And I don't think I'm the only one who's a little bit frustrated with the speed of decentralizing the sequencer. The reason that they're saying, oh, we don't know if we want to decentralize the sequencer, from what I can see, is like, okay, they have some guarantees that they want to provide users about execution quality. And it's harder to do that when you're not doing the sequencing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is revenue, I would say.
So Max, let's say like we have all the tools available for layer 2s to become like a decentralized blockchain. I think what you're really saying is like, we'll just look at the Ethereum layer 1, look at all the tools that we have down there, just copy and paste those tools up to the layer 2 level. There's a little bit of difference with a ZK proof or a fraud proof, whether we're a ZK rollup or optimistic rollup, but that's kind of the main difference. But other than that, like the tech stack is largely the same. We know how to do this. It's a known science. Just copy and paste that structure and put it at the layer 2 level. Like, why aren't we doing this? Say we do actually get to that structure, that pattern, where we have like a distributed validator set, sequencer set at the layer 2 level. Does that actually change your opinion as to whether or not that layer 2s are extensions of Ethereum? Because I don't think there's any like additional change in economics, and there's no different of a relationship between the layer 1 and the layer 2. Like the layer 2 isn't, burning any more layer 1 block space. There's not really any change in the relationship there. Just the layer 2s are now decentralized and more like crypto ethos aligned. So does that change if the layer 2s did change into this pattern that you want? Would you change your answer about whether layer 2s are on some like this misaligned part of the continuum of Ethereum alignment?
Yeah, I would say that they would move much closer to being part of Ethereum. I don't know if they would be exactly part of Ethereum. I think it would depend on a lot of things.
How do you measure that?
In terms of how close they are on that continuum?
Yeah. Like what makes something like equivalent to Ethereum, and what makes something like misaligned with Ethereum? Like what is the measure that you're using that would say that like these layer 2s in this new paradigm are more closely tied to Ethereum?
I think it's more, for me, I'm an economist. I think about incentives a lot. And it's really how closely aligned are the incentives? Is the incentive right now of Base to basically make Ethereum as good as possible? Or is Ethereum actually a competitor to Base? And so if Ethereum gets better, does that make Base lose users, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I would call the misalignment there. Mm. If we're at a position where growing the pie, making the whole ecosystem better is good, and all rollups want to succeed together, and they all, I think in particular, are not competing with the Base, the L1 chain. I mean, right now they're really direct competitors. So how can we call a direct competitor to Ethereum part of Ethereum? That doesn't make any sense to me. They're competing for the same user set on the same applications. So somehow we need to, there's no reason that it has to be that way for, in my opinion. I think we can build an L1, which is really good for decentralized finance, and then kind of shovel the other types of transactions, the basic transfers, stuff like this, that isn't as contentious on state, to the L2s. And that can actually be useful because it means that the L2 takes a bunch of load off the L1 and that lets the L1 do its job properly. That would be like a symbiotic relationship. But I would say it's more of a parasitic relationship right now, because the L2s are trying to take decentralized finance away from the L1 and have it on the L2, which again is a centralized sequencer right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so say we get into the state of layer twos that like make you happy, right? Like we decentralize the sequencer, layer twos get censorship resistance, the happy state that you're asking for. When we pose the question like, are layer twos extensions of Ethereum? The skeptic conversation that says that no, they're not, they're lesser extensions of Ethereum, is that they have like separate state from the Ethereum layer one. They have separate transaction ordering rules. They have separate execution fee capture by the layer two. And if we go down the happy path that you still illustrated, I still see all of those things happening. Like it's still a separate chain that's separate from the Ethereum layer one that isn't really passing back much value capture down to the layer one. So that's kind of why I'm confused about like why does this move the needle on whether layer twos are extensions of Ethereum, because they are still completely independent blockchains with like that hold state. How would you respond to that?
There's a question about power dynamics. If the L1 is this decentralized thing where we have to move slowly because there's a bunch of stakeholders, and we are constrained in what we can provide to users by the fact that we're decentralized, then the competition between whether you do your DeFi on the L1 versus the L2 is unfair, fundamentally, because users are gonna optimize for they're not going to consider security, just in the same way people don't purchase insurance in the optimal quantity. Like users are going to go to where it looks good in the short term. They're not going to consider tail risk. They're not going to consider decentralization, even if considering those things would be better for them. And eventually all the users are going to leave the L1 and making it a level playing field where we're both operating in terms of a decentralized sequencer. We both have the same constraints, I think would be better. And then you also provide some of the same credible neutrality that Ethereum has, right? I mean, the more features of Ethereum that these L2s have, they're already inheriting security. They're already inheriting like the finality, right? What if they also inherit the credible neutrality? That would be good. And like the more features we have, the closer they are to Ethereum. But I think there's still a fundamental tension about whether user activity is going to happen on the L1 or the L2. And it's very hard to say that these things are part of an ecosystem when they're competing directly on the users themselves, which is the lifeblood of Ethereum.
Okay, so as you think about that, like extension of Ethereum continuum, it's less about having like being a one-to-one extension of the Ethereum block space. It's not about having like overlapping resources. So these things can be independent chains, but if the feature set is like at parity, if the I think what you're worried about is like a lot of layer twos are kind of like cheating in a way. They're like, centralizing the sequencer. They're not aligned. They're not doing the crypto alignment with censorship resistance, not crypto ethos. And therefore they're kind of like running interference on the value capture because they are not, and they don't have the same like feature set that Ethereum has, which is like decentralization, censorship resistance. And that's what you're saying is making them less extensions of Ethereum.
And I think still there's going to be a substantive difference, because if optimism is not Arbitrum, then by the transitive property, it cannot also be the case that optimism is Ethereum and Arbitrum is Ethereum, because then Arbitrum would be optimism. This is like a fundamental contradiction. It's very clear that the L2s are competing with each other. Right now, it's also clear that the L2s are competing with the L1 itself for users. And we need to get to a situation where there are types of activity that happens on the L1 is very different from the type of activity that happens on the L2. Otherwise, that tension is always going to be there. And having, groups of core devs who work at an L2 and are influencing the roadmap in a certain direction is, I think, potentially deeply problematic as we look into the future. Right now, everybody's aligned. We're all chilling. It's a, bull market or whatever. We're all people who are here from the start and are trying to build serious stuff. But eventually, economic forces cannot be denied. Eventually, the incentives are going to show up. I think they're showing up already in terms of this time boost proposal, in terms of how much Base is charging above and beyond the cost it should be charging based on the L1 cost. Optimism, Superchain, like the OP mainnet is actually kind of unique. I don't want to lump them in with those two groups because it looks like from my conversations with them, they're actually more committed to not raking users and more committed to a decentralized sequencer in the short run that has these properties. So I don't want to lump them in, but like Base and Arbitrum in particular, to me, it looks like the incentives are very strong not to decentralize the sequencer. And that means that they're a direct competitor with Ethereum.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.